The war that Hamas is waging is exactly the moral opposite, a perversion of morality in a way that boggles the mind. You see, normally when you fight battles, it is the army which represents the people, and it's the combatants who risk their lives against other combatants. Civilians, certainly your own civilians, are protected, and you do your utmost not to kill other civilians because your battle is first and foremost with military against military. It is incredible to see that this is exactly the opposite how Hamas is fighting the war, and indeed is the very reason why they have no moral raison d'etre to exist, and as a regime need to be destroyed. While Israel goes out of it does everything it can to protect our own civilians and do everything to limit civilian loss, arguably, as the head of West Point had said, more than any other military in the history of urban warfare. What do Hamas do? A, they target directly our civilians, as we know it was done in the most horrific way on October 7th. And secondly, they have total disregard for their own civilians. That has been pointed out, that whereas in every home in Israel and public space, we build bomb shelters for our civilians, Hamas has not built one bomb shelter. They've only built tunnels under their civilians and under the kindergarten, schools and hospitals, endangering them, while their tunnels are only for the militants and the terrorists and perhaps to put hostages. And the worst of all, not only targeting and killing civilians, stealing civilians, taking hostages. You see, we also have a military against military prisoners of war. This is not about prisoners of war. This is ignoring the soldiers, and predominantly, almost without exception, our son is one of the soldiers taken captive. But the vast majority are civilians, stolen in broad daylight, and used as bargaining chips in the most horrific way. This is exactly the Amalekite type ideology that we see in this week's parasha, the end of parasha Teitzei, which the Torah calls upon us to obliterate. Rav Soloveitchik says, as we know today, the nation Amalek no longer exists. What we have today is not the Amalekites, but the ideology. And what are the footprints? How can we locate and identify Amalekite type ideology, which would therefore mean a regime that needs to be destroyed? What is that? That, of course, is terrorism. Because the Amalekites were the great and first terrorists of the world. In this week's parasha, it explicitly says, what did they do? They did not target the men of military age. They targeted They targeted the infirm, the young, those who were unable to fight. They specifically came to take them hostage and to sell them as slaves. People who do not accept any international norms. Not soldiers against soldiers, but soldiers who take and steal civilians, and the infirm and the defenseless. Velo yireh Elokim, and had no fear of God. Incredibly, what does no fear of God mean? It's the same where Abraham is told, why did Abraham need to lie that Sarah, when he came to the Philistines and said that Sarah is my sister, not my wife? Why did he need to lie? Says the king of the Philistines to Abraham. And he says, because in this place, there's no yirat Elokim. There's no basic fear of heaven, meaning there's no basic morality. When you cannot protect your own citizens, when you can steal the husbands of wives of defenseless people, and take children out of their cribs, there is no basic morality. And this is the antithesis of everything that godliness stands for. May it be that every single one of our hostages so brutally taken, and our son amongst them, be returned speedily. And may it be that this regime, which trades in the weak and steals the infirm, be obliterated from the face of the earth, so that morality will prevail and the light that Judaism represents will prevail in the darkness of barbarism that Hamas represents. Shabbat Shalom.